The Kensington house glittered with warm light, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pies drifting into the frosty December air. From the outside, it looked like a postcard of holiday perfection. The grand dining room glowing with candles, laughter spilling through the tall windows, the kind of scene people imagine when they think of Christmas. But for me, Aria Kensington, it was just another stage. Another carefully arranged backdrop where my mother, Lorraine, would play the adoring matriarch, while I quietly endured my role as the family's forgotten daughter. I had spent the afternoon helping with preparations, arranging silverware, polishing glasses, even driving across town to pick up the desserts my mother insisted on serving, but never bothered to bake herself. As always, I moved through the motions silently, doing the thankless work no one else noticed. By the time guests began to arrive, neighbors, a few distant cousins, and of course, my siblings, I already felt the weight pressing on my chest. My younger brother, Jared, breezed in like a king returning from conquest. He wasn't particularly successful, but he carried himself as though the world owed him respect. My mother's eyes lit up the moment she saw him. "There's my golden boy," she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug, her voice dripping with pride. Beside him, my sister Tessa followed in a cloud of perfume and laughter, already chattering about some trivial story that had the relatives hanging on every word. And then there was me, Aria, the eldest, the responsible one, the invisible one. We sat down for dinner, the table spread with every traditional dish you could imagine: mashed potatoes, glazed ham, stuffing spilling from crystal bowls. My father, Victor, sat at the head, stiff as ever, offering curt nods but little warmth. He had long ago surrendered control of the family narrative to my mother, and she wielded it like a weapon. The conversation flowed, all of it revolving around Jared's new plans and Tessa's latest adventures. Every achievement, real or exaggerated, was celebrated as though they were conquering heroes. My contributions, my life, my efforts, not a word. I cut my turkey quietly, forcing a smile where it was expected. Then, as dessert plates were cleared and glasses of wine refilled, it happened. Lorraine leaned back in her chair, surveying the table with a theatrical sigh. "You know," she said, her voice carrying above the chatter, "I sometimes wonder how I ended up with such different children." Laughter murmured around the table, waiting for her to continue. "Jared," she gestured toward him, her eyes glowing with pride, "is ambitious, full of potential. Tessa has charm, she lights up any room she enters. But Aria..." She paused, her lips curling into the faintest smile, sharp enough to cut. "Aria is the most useless child we have." The words sliced through the air, sharper than any knife. On that table, the room fell into stunned silence, broken only by Jared's uneasy chuckle and Tessa's smirk. A cousin shifted uncomfortably in their chair. My father said nothing, staring into his glass, as though the wine might offer an escape. Heat flooded my face, my heart thudding so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. For a moment, I sat frozen, my fork poised above my plate. Every pair of eyes at that table was on me, waiting to see how I would react. The old me, the Aria who had spent years swallowing insults, smoothing conflicts, and biting back tears, would have laughed awkwardly, brushed it off, pretended it didn't matter. That's what my mother expected. That's what they all expected. But this time, something cracked inside me. I set my fork down slowly, deliberately, the sound of metal against china ringing in the silence. I looked at my mother, really looked at her. The carefully styled hair, the satisfied gleam in her eyes, the thrill she got from my humiliation. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt angry. I wanted to speak. To throw her cruelty back in her face, to list every sacrifice I had made. Every time I had been the one holding this family together, while Jared stumbled and Tessa basked in praise. I wanted to scream, but instead I drew in a breath and forced myself to remain calm. I met her eyes and said softly, Noted. Just one word, simple, controlled. But it carried a weight that shifted the air in the room. Lorraine blinked, thrown off for a fraction of a second before masking it with a smirk. She moved on quickly, redirecting the conversation back to Jared as though nothing had happened. But I saw it. That flicker of uncertainty. She wasn't expecting me to hold her gaze, to answer back with steady calm instead of silence. The dinner carried on, the laughter resuming, but I barely heard any of it. My mind was buzzing, my pulse steadying into something different, not shame, not fear, but resolve. That night, as I slipped into my coat and prepared to leave, my Aunt Marianne caught my arm. Her eyes, kind and searching, lingered on mine. She had heard, she had seen. "You don't deserve that," she whispered. "Not one bit." I managed a small smile, but inside, something had already shifted. My mother thought she had won, that her cutting words had once again put me in my place, but she was wrong. Because this Christmas night wasn't just another humiliation, it was the breaking point. And someday soon, I would make sure she never forgot it. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in bed, the glow of the Christmas lights from the street outside flickering across my ceiling. The words my mother had spoken replayed in my head like a cruel song on repeat. The most useless child we have. It wasn't new, not really. My mother had always had a way of cutting me down, whether it was with sharp insults dressed as jokes or comparisons to Jared and Tessa that left me feeling like a shadow. But something about her saying it aloud, in front of relatives and neighbors, stung deeper. It was one thing to be dismissed in private. It was another to be humiliated publicly, stripped of dignity like entertainment at her holiday table. I turned on my side, staring at the small framed photo on my nightstand. It was from years ago, a rare family trip to the coast. Jared stood tall in the middle, grinning broadly, my mother's arm proudly around him. Tessa leaned close, flipping her hair with practiced grace, and there I was at the end, half hidden, my smile thin and uncertain. Even in photographs, I seemed to vanish. Growing up, I had learned quickly that my role in the family wasn't to shine. It was to support. When Jared failed out of a college class, I was the one who helped him rework his schedule. When Tessa overspent her allowance, I was the one who lent her money. Whenever something went wrong, my mother turned to me. Not with gratitude, but with expectation. "Fix it, Aria, handle it, sacrifice for them." And I did. For years, I did. It wasn't that I lacked ambition or talent. At work, I was competent, even admired. Philip Grant, my manager, often praised my ability to stay composed under pressure, to manage details others overlooked. Colleagues trusted me, friends valued me. But within the Kensington home, none of that mattered. There, I was still the girl who never measured up. As I stared into the darkness, a memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in years. I was 15, sitting at the kitchen table, proudly showing my report card. Straight A's, a scholarship recommendation from a teacher. My father gave a distracted nod. My mother barely glanced at it before turning to Jared. "Did you score in double digits in your basketball game?" she asked him, eyes sparkling. When he nodded, she clapped her hands with delight, showering him with praise. My paper, still in my hands, felt invisible. That was my childhood in a single scene. My achievements unnoticed, theirs magnified. For a long time, I told myself it didn't matter. That one day, when I built a life of my own, their approval would stop being important. But as the years went on, I realized something painful. It wasn't their approval I longed for. It was simple recognition. A moment where they looked at me and truly saw me. And now, lying in the quiet aftermath of Christmas, I finally understood something else. That recognition would never come. Not from Lorraine, not from Victor, not from Jared or Tessa. If I wanted to be seen, I would have to step into the light myself. The next morning, I sat at my small kitchen table with a cup of coffee, my notebook open in front of me. Normally, my lists were filled with errands, grocery items, or work tasks. But this time, I wrote something different: what I've done for them. The list grew quickly: money lent, projects finished on their behalf, errands run, lies covered, sacrifices made. Line after line, the evidence of years poured out of me. With each entry, I felt both heavier and lighter. Heavier with the weight of what I had endured, but lighter knowing it was finally in front of me, undeniable. By the time I put the pen down, one truth was clear: I had been useful. In fact, I had been the most useful one of all. And yet, my mother still called me useless. I closed the notebook slowly, a strange calm settling over me. Maybe for the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to her cruelty. I was recording it, acknowledging it, building something. And though I didn't know it yet, that list would be the foundation of everything that came after. As I sipped the last of my coffee, my phone buzzed with a message from Aunt Marianne. "Thinking of you. If you ever need to talk, I'm here." My lips curved into the smallest of smiles. I wasn't entirely alone. Not anymore. For the first time in years, I felt the faintest spark of power. This was only the beginning. The week after Christmas felt strangely heavy. At work, the world carried on as usual. Reports to finish, clients to meet, deadlines to manage. I moved through my tasks with my usual composure, answering emails and attending meetings. To anyone watching, I looked the same as ever. But inside, I carried the echo of my mother's voice, like a bruise that hadn't faded. I told myself I could let it go, that if I just focused on my own life, her words would eventually dissolve into the background noise of all the other times she had belittled me. But that illusion shattered one evening when my phone buzzed with a message from a cousin. "I heard your mom say you were jealous of Jared again. Are you okay?" Jealous. There it was, the label she always reached for. Anytime I dared to question the favoritism, anytime I showed even the smallest spark of independence, she painted me as envious. It was her shield, her excuse, the story she spun to protect Jared's golden image. And this time, she wasn't whispering it just within the walls of our home. She was spreading it to the rest of the family. 2 days later, Aunt Marianne confirmed it. Over coffee at a small cafe, she leaned in and lowered her voice. "Lorraine's been talking," she said. "She told your uncle that you embarrassed her at Christmas, that you've always resented Jared and Tessa, that you're bitter." Her eyes softened with sympathy. "I know it's not true, Aria, but she's laying the groundwork. She wants people to see you as unstable so no one questions her." I stirred my drink slowly, the spoon clinking against the porcelain. Once, that knowledge would have crushed me. The fear of relatives whispering behind my back, believing her version of me instead of the truth. But now, as the words settled, I felt something steadier rising in me. If my mother wanted to turn this into a story, then I would be ready. With my own. That night, I pulled out the notebook where I had started my list of sacrifices. Page after page, I added more. Times I had covered Jared's rent, proof of the loan I gave Tessa for her car, text messages where my mother had asked me to help clean up Jared's mistakes. Each entry was like laying a brick in a wall of truth that no rumor could topple. It wasn't about revenge yet, not fully. It was about reclaiming my narrative. For years, Lorraine had dictated how people saw me. Quiet Aria, bitter Aria, jealous Aria. But I was done with that. If she wanted a war of perception, I would not walk into it unarmed. At work, I noticed something I hadn't before. Philip Grant, my manager, trusted me with responsibilities others hesitated to take. "You have a way of staying steady," he told me once. "When things fall apart, you don't panic, you plan." His words stuck with me. They weren't meant as advice, but they lit a realization. The same skill that made me valuable at work could save me and my family. I didn't need to lash out in anger. I needed to be patient, strategic. One evening, scrolling through my phone, I noticed Jared's social media. Picture after picture painted him as thriving. Dinners at expensive restaurants, captions about business ventures. But I knew the truth. He had borrowed money again just last month, money he hadn't paid back. Behind the glossy images was nothing but debt and excuses. And my mother, of course, covered for him. The contrast was almost laughable. They painted me as jealous while Jared lived on borrowed time, literally. I closed the app and exhaled slowly. They thought I was still the silent one, the girl who swallowed insults and kept family secrets. What they didn't realize was that silence didn't mean weakness. Silence could be preparation. When I met Aunt Marianne again a week later, I brought the notebook with me. She skimmed a few pages, her brows knitting as she saw the extent of what I had carried. "Aria," she whispered, This is powerful. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I nodded, my jaw tightening. "I'm not going to, Aunt Marianne." Not anymore. For the first time in years, I felt the power shift ever so slightly. My mother could whisper in the dark, but I was building a light she wouldn't be able to extinguish. And soon, I would make sure the entire family saw her for who she really was. If my mother's whispers were meant to bruise me, Jared's schemes were designed to break me. It started small, little things that seemed harmless at first. A casual remark to a relative about how I was struggling at work. A suggestion that I was too serious, too bitter. Harmless words, unless you strung them together and realized what he was doing, setting the stage. But Jared never knew when to stop. One Friday evening, I came home from work to find a voicemail on my phone. It was from a family friend, Mrs. Gallagher. She was polite but hesitant. "Aria," she said, "I just wanted to check. Did you really borrow money from Jared? He mentioned you were having trouble paying your bills, and I was concerned." I froze, the words rattling in my ears. Borrowing money? From Jared? It was absurd. If anything, the reverse had been true for years. I was the one covering his late rent, his missed car payments. And now he was spinning a story where I was the one dependent on him. I sat down at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, a cold calm settling over me. This wasn't just casual sibling rivalry anymore. This was targeted. He wanted to paint me as weak, unstable, incapable, and Lorraine would, of course, echo the lie. 2 days later, I saw him at a family gathering. The Kensington house was buzzing with guests. One of Lorraine's endless excuses for a dinner party. The crystal glasses clinked, the chandelier sparkled, and I stood in the corner, watching Jared hold court as usual. He was telling some story about a friend who had begged him for financial help. The smug glance he shot in my direction made it clear who that friend was meant to be. The old me might have flushed with shame, shrunk into the wallpaper, prayed for the night to end. But this time, I didn't flinch. Instead, I let a smile touch my lips. Slow, deliberate, unbothered. When the story ended and laughter rippled around the room, I stepped forward. My voice was calm, light even, but it cut through the noise. "That's interesting, Jared. Because I could have sworn it was you who asked me for money last month. Do you need me to show the message?" The room went still. For a moment, Jared's mask slipped. His jaw tightened, his eyes flickered. But he recovered quickly, laughing too loudly, waving a hand. "Oh, come on, Aria, don't be so serious. It was just a joke." But the silence that followed wasn't the laughter he expected. People shifted uncomfortably. A few avoided his eyes. A few looked at me differently, not as the butt of his joke, but as someone who had just calmly, confidently drawn a line. I didn't press it further. I didn't need to. Sometimes one strike was enough to leave a crack. Later that night, as guests began to leave, Aunt Marianne squeezed my hand. "You handled that perfectly," she whispered. "No shouting, no drama. Just the truth." And she was right. For years, I had let them define me, the jealous one, the bitter one, the useless one. But now, with every calm, measured word, I was rewriting the story. Of course Jared wouldn't stop. He thrived on attention, and as long as my mother adored him, he would keep finding ways to drag me down. But I had learned something important that night. I didn't need to fight on his level. I didn't need to shout to be heard. The truth was louder than any of his lies. As I left the house, the winter air biting against my skin, I knew this was only the beginning. Jared thought he had me cornered. My mother thought her narrative was unshakable. But I was no longer playing defense. I was building my case. Brick by brick, lie by lie, I was preparing for the moment when everything they had built, every illusion, every manipulation, would come crashing down. And when that day came, they wouldn't just be embarrassed. They would be exposed. If there was one thing I had learned about my mother, Lorraine Kensington, it was this. She could not stand losing control. After the dinner party incident, the moment I calmly turned Jared's lie against him, I knew she would not let it go. I saw in her eyes that night, the tightness in her smile as guests left, the way she lingered near Jared, whispering sharply while pretending to laugh. Lorraine loved her golden boy too much to let him stumble without someone else to blame. And in her mind, that someone was me. The first strike came in subtle ways, a phone call to a distant cousin where she described me as ungrateful, a whispered remark at church about how I was difficult. When those didn't sting enough, she escalated. One evening, I arrived home to find a voicemail from my father, Victor. His voice was weary, but his words were clear. Aria, your mother says you embarrassed Jared. She thinks you need to apologize. For the good of the family, I sat in silence, the phone pressed to my ear long after the message ended. Apologize? For telling the truth? For refusing to let Jared smear me publicly? It was almost laughable, almost. But beneath the absurdity was something darker. Lorraine wasn't just angry. She was building her narrative, gathering soldiers. She wanted me cornered, desperate enough to back down. Except this time, I wouldn't. I pulled my notebook from its place on my desk, flipping through the pages filled with dates, receipts, text messages. Each line reminded me of the years I had carried burdens no one else acknowledged. I wasn't bitter, I was prepared. But if my mother wanted a battle, I couldn't just sit and wait. I needed allies. That week, I met Aunt Marianne again at the cafe. Sliding the notebook across the table, I showed her more entries. The rent payments I had covered for Jared. The money I had lent Tessa. Screenshots of text messages where Lorraine herself had asked me to quietly fix their problems. Marianne's eyes widened as she read. Aria, this is undeniable. You've been their safety net for years, and they've erased it. I leaned back, my coffee cooling untouched. They want to make me look weak. But when the time comes, I'll show them what useless really looks like. She nodded slowly, her expression torn between sadness and admiration. You've been patient too long. Just make sure, when you do this, you don't stoop to their level. Let the truth do the work. Her words stayed with me. At work, I found myself studying Philip Grant, my manager, more closely. He had a way of navigating conflicts without ever raising his voice. When a client lied, he didn't shout them down. He simply presented facts so clearly that the lie unraveled on its own. People respected him for it. That was the model I needed. Not fire, not fury, precision. And so, I began collecting not just memories, but evidence. Bank transfers, screenshots, old emails. Everything that proved I had been the one holding the family together while Jared basked in false glory. I wasn't sure when the moment would come, but I knew it would. Families like mine always reached a breaking point. Lorraine didn't realize it, but with every whisper, every cruel word, she was tightening her own noose. One evening, as I left the office, I found Jared waiting outside. He leaned casually against his car, the same smug grin plastered on his face. Aria, he drawled. Mom says you're getting too defensive lately. Maybe you should relax. Everyone knows you're just jealous. Don't make it worse for yourself." I stared at him for a long moment, my bag heavy on my shoulder, the city lights flickering behind him. I could have lashed out, called him out on every lie, but instead I smiled faintly. "Careful, Jared," I said softly. "You're not as untouchable as you think." For the first time, his grin faltered. I walked past him without another word, my heels clicking against the pavement, my heart steady. This wasn't about winning a single skirmish anymore. This was about patience, about timing, about making sure that when the truth finally surfaced, there would be no escape, no denial, no rewriting. And when that day came, Lorraine and Jared wouldn't just lose control of the narrative. They would lose the illusion entirely. The new year arrived with a brittle kind of cold, the kind that seeped into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. For most people, January meant resolutions, fresh starts, promises of change. For me, it meant quiet preparation. Every day I spent at work, every evening I sat at my kitchen table with my notebook, I felt the pieces coming together. But if I was building a case, my mother was doubling down on her campaign. I heard it in the careful comments relatives dropped when I spoke to them. "Aria, are you okay? Your mom says you've been distant lately." Or, "I hope you and Jared aren't fighting. Your mother worries you've been jealous since childhood." Jealous. The word clung to me like smoke, no matter how false it was. But instead of burning, I let it coat me in resolve. Every whisper, every rumor, was more proof of how desperate Lorraine was to keep control. One evening, I stopped by the Kensington house. I hadn't planned to. I rarely visited anymore unless absolutely necessary. But my father had asked me to help him with some paperwork. Victor Kensington had always been a man of silence, his presence heavy but rarely felt. He wasn't cruel like Lorraine, but he wasn't a shield either. That night, as I sat across from him in his study, I noticed something different. His face was more lined, his movements slower, but it was his eyes that caught me. They carried a weariness I hadn't seen before. "You don't come around much anymore," he said quietly, sorting through the stack of bills. I hesitated. "It's easier that way." He looked up, studying me for a moment. "Your mother." He stopped, pressing his lips together. "She says you've been difficult. That you embarrassed Jared. That you—" He exhaled sharply. "But I don't know if I believe it anymore." The words startled me more than I expected. For years, he had been her shadow, nodding along, never questioning. Now, for the first time, doubt had cracked his mask. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "You've seen it, Dad. You know how it's been. I've covered for Jared more times than I can count. I've supported Tessa when she made mistakes. And Mom never once acknowledged it. She calls me useless, but I've been the one holding things together." His eyes flickered, a mix of guilt and recognition. He didn't argue. He didn't defend her. And that silence was more powerful than any denial. When I left that night, the cold air hit my face like a warning. Change was coming, but it would not be gentle. A few days later, I met Aunt Marianne again. She had become my sounding board, my quiet ally. We sat in our usual booth at the cafe, steam rising from our mugs. "I think my father is starting to see it," I told her. He didn't say much, but he didn't defend her either. Marianne gave a small, knowing smile. "That's how it starts. Sometimes silence is the loudest shift. Don't underestimate it." Her words echoed in me. At work, Philip noticed a change in me too. One afternoon, after a tense client meeting where I kept my composure while others floundered, he pulled me aside. "Aria, you have a gift. You know how to wait, to let people reveal themselves." He chuckled. "It unnerves them, but it works." I thought of my mother, of Jared, of the years they had relied on me to stay quiet. "Yes," I murmured, "it does work." That weekend, another dinner invitation arrived from Lorraine. Normally, I would have declined. But this time, I accepted. Not because I wanted her company, but because I needed to watch, to measure, to collect. The Kensington dining room glittered as always, but beneath the shine, the tension was unmistakable. Lorraine performed her usual theatrics, praising Jared's business ventures, gushing over Tessa's social brilliance. But I noticed something subtle: the glances relatives exchanged, the faint hesitation in their laughter. My quiet pushback at the last dinner had planted seeds, and now they were sprouting cracks in her perfect performance. Halfway through the meal, Lorraine launched into another story. "It's just heartbreaking," she said with a sigh, her hand dramatically over her chest. "Aria has always been difficult. I've tried to help her, but she refuses to accept love. It's jealousy, plain and simple." The table was silent for a moment. Then my father cleared his throat. "Lorraine," he said slowly, "maybe you shouldn't speak that way at the table." The air shifted instantly. My mother froze, her fork halfway to her plate. Jared blinked in surprise. Tessa's smile faltered. It was a small sentence, a mild rebuke, but from Victor Kensington, it was a thunderclap. I said nothing, only lifted my glass of water and took a slow sip. But inside, my pulse thrummed with quiet victory. The cracks were widening. Lorraine didn't know it yet, but her empire was beginning to crumble. Not because I shouted, not because I fought, but because truth has a way of seeping through the cracks, no matter how tightly you try to seal them. And I was going to make sure those cracks became fractures. If Chapter 6 of my life had been about silence breaking, Chapter 7 was about whispers changing direction. For years, my mother's voice had been the only one that mattered, echoing through relatives and friends like scripture. But now I could feel it. The narrative was slipping. And Lorraine knew it. Her retaliation came swiftly. Within days of the dinner where my father had dared to hush her, she called me. Her voice was syrupy, artificial sweetness masking the bite beneath. "Aria, darling," she cooed. "I think you've misunderstood me. I only ever want the best for you. You know how people talk. I'm just trying to protect you from yourself." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. Protect me? By calling me useless? By telling the family I'm jealous of my own siblings? There was a pause, the kind of pause Lorraine never allowed in conversation. Then her tone sharpened, steel glinting beneath the sugar. "You need to be careful, Aria. Families fall apart when one child insists on painting themselves as a victim. Don't make me choose between you and Jared." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And the chilling part was that she said it as though she hadn't already chosen long ago. That weekend, the Kensington house buzzed again with relatives. Lorraine was determined to perform her perfect family play. I arrived deliberately late, stepping into a room thick with warmth and laughter. But beneath it, I felt eyes shift toward me, curiosity simmering. Jared was mid-story, something about his new venture. I caught snippets, big investors, exciting opportunities, success on the horizon. But when I glanced at Aunt Marianne across the table, I saw the faintest shake of her head. She knew, as I did, that Jared's stories were built on borrowed money and broken promises. Lorraine, of course, applauded him, like a queen admiring her heir. "Isn't he remarkable?" she gushed. "So driven, so full of potential." "We're so proud," I said nothing. Not yet. But later that evening, as the plates were cleared and the wine flowed, a cousin leaned toward me. Her voice was low, but her words carried weight. "Aria, is it true you helped Jared pay off his rent last year?" My mom said she thought she overheard something. I looked at her steadily, the hum of voices around us fading. "It's true." And it wasn't the first time her eyes widened. "But he told everyone he bought that apartment on his own." I only smiled faintly. "Jared tells a lot of stories." I didn't say more. I didn't need to. The seed was planted. By the time dessert was served, I noticed the glances again. Not pitying this time, not mocking. Curious, doubtful. The script was shifting. Lorraine must have sensed it, because she tried to tighten her grip. "You know," she said loudly, her eyes on me, "families are only strong when everyone knows their place." Aria sometimes struggles with that, but we love her anyway. The words should have landed like a blow, but instead, I heard the faintest sigh from across the table. My father. He set down his fork, his face unreadable, but the sound alone was enough to make Lorraine falter. She glanced at him, searching for support, but none came. For the first time, she was speaking into a room that wasn't entirely hers anymore. When I left that night, Aunt Marianne walked me to the door. Her hand squeezed mine. "They're starting to see it, Aria. Piece by piece. Don't rush. Let them," I nodded, pulling my coat tighter around me as the winter air met my face. She was right. My mother and Jared were clawing to hold their throne, but every lie, every performance, only exposed them further. For years I had been the invisible one, the scapegoat, the silent child in the shadows of the Kensington family portrait. But now, the spotlight was shifting. People were starting to see me not as the bitter outsider Lorraine painted, but as something else entirely, as the truth. And the truth has a way of gathering its own allies. It didn't take long for Jared to feel the shift. He might have been blind to responsibility, but he wasn't blind to attention, and lately he had noticed what I had. The relatives weren't hanging on his words the way they used to. Their smiles were a little tighter, their laughter a little thinner. And in the Kensington family, attention was currency. For Jared, that meant survival. His retaliation came one Saturday afternoon, when a group of us gathered at my parents' house for what my mother grandly called a planning lunch, a chance to discuss family matters, though in truth it was just another excuse for her to show off her carefully curated home. I was in the kitchen helping my aunt with dishes when I heard Jared's voice rise in the dining room. Loud, deliberate. "You know," he said, "I hate to say this, but Aria's been struggling. I mean, I've bailed her out more times than I can count. It's embarrassing, really, the way she leans on me." The words froze me where I stood, suds clinging to my hands. He wasn't just spinning a casual lie anymore. He was trying to destroy me in front of the very people who were beginning to question him. I stepped into the doorway before anyone could respond. My voice was calm, but every word carried steel. "That's interesting, Jared." Because I have receipts that say otherwise, the room stilled. Eyes shifted from him to me, curiosity sharpening into something else. Jared laughed, too loudly, waving a hand. "Oh, come on, Aria. Always so serious. Can't you take a joke?" But no one laughed. Not this time. I moved to the table, pulling out my phone. My fingers swiped deliberately until I opened the transfer history. Payments I had made to Jared, month after month. I laid the screen on the table, letting the numbers speak louder than I ever could. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. My father leaned forward, his eyes scanning the screen before shifting to Jared. His voice was quiet but cutting. "Is this true?" For the first time, Jared stammered. Well, you don't understand, Dad. It's complicated." "It looks simple to me," Victor interrupted, his tone sharper than I'd heard in years. Lorraine jumped in, her voice shrill with urgency. "Victor, don't start. Jared's had opportunities. Aria just exaggerates." But it was too late. The damage was done. The golden boy's shine had dimmed, if only slightly, and I had been the one to dim it. I didn't push further. I didn't need to. I simply slid my phone back into my pocket, my expression calm. "I don't mind helping family," I said softly, my eyes never leaving Jared's. "But I won't be painted as a burden when I've been carrying the weight." The words lingered in the air, undeniable. The rest of the lunch passed in awkward fragments. Conversation stilted, laughter forced. Jared avoided my gaze, his charm faltering under the weight of truth. Lorraine tried desperately to recover, spinning new stories, but the room had already shifted. Later, as I gathered my coat to leave, my father approached me in the hallway. His voice was low, almost reluctant. "Aria." I should have paid more attention. I didn't realize. He trailed off, the words catching in his throat. I looked at him for a long moment, a strange mixture of anger and pity twisting in my chest. It's not too late to realize, I said quietly. Then I walked out into the crisp evening air. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened my notebook again. I added a new entry, family lunch. Expose Jared with receipts. Each page was no longer just a record of survival. It was a roadmap, a steady, deliberate path toward the moment they could no longer deny who I really was. And as much as Jared thrashed and Lorraine schemed, their desperation only proved one thing. The Kensington story was no longer theirs to tell. It was mine. Lorraine Kensington was not a woman who surrendered easily. For as long as I could remember, she had ruled our family with a velvet glove over an iron fist. Her words shaped our image. Her praise anointed the chosen. Her criticism cut the rest down to size. And she had always believed her voice was law. But after the planning lunch, after Jared's stumble and my quiet exposure of his lies, she knew her grip was slipping. I could see it in the tightness of her smile, in the way her laugh cracked under pressure, in the sharp edge of her voice whenever my name came up. So she did what any desperate ruler does when power begins to crumble. She went to war. 2 weeks later, I heard from Aunt Marianne first. A phone call, hushed and urgent. "Aria," she said, "Lorraine's been calling relatives. She's saying you've turned bitter, that you're trying to humiliate Jared out of jealousy. She even hinted that you're unstable." I closed my eyes, my grip on the phone tightening. "Unstable?" "Yes. She wants people to see you as irrational before you can expose her further." Marianne's voice softened. "But some aren't buying it anymore. They've seen too much still," the word cut. For years she had painted me as jealous. Now she was escalating to unhinged. It was a classic tactic. If you can't silence someone, discredit them. Days later, I saw it firsthand at another family dinner. Lorraine waited until the meal was over, until coffee cups were steaming on the table, before she struck. Her voice was calm, almost sorrowful, her expression carefully composed. "You know," she said to the room, "I worry about Aria sometimes. She's so angry lately, so resentful. I've done everything I can as a mother, but she seems determined to tear this family apart. I fear she's not well." Gasps and murmurs rippled around the table. Her performance was flawless, the concerned mother burdened by a troubled child. She even dabbed her eyes with a napkin, a touch of theatrics that might have worked once. But this time, the silence that followed wasn't sympathy. It was suspicion. My father cleared his throat, his voice quiet but firm. "Lorraine, that's enough." The room froze. He looked around the table, his gaze heavy. "I've been watching, and I think we all know Aria isn't the problem here." Lorraine's face paled, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Jared shifted uncomfortably, his usual grin gone. I said nothing, not yet. I let the silence stretch, let my father's words linger in the air. For the first time in my life, he had spoken for me, and the weight of it was undeniable. When the dinner ended, I left quietly, but inside, my resolve was harder than steel. Lorraine's last move was desperate, reckless. She had thrown her sharpest weapon, and it hadn't landed. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table with my notebook, flipping through the pages filled with evidence, memories, proof. My list was no longer just a private shield. It was ammunition. The time for waiting was nearly over. They had tried to humiliate me. They had tried to silence me. They had tried to twist me into the villain of their story. But now, the stage was set. And at the next family gathering, I would deliver the truth. Not in whispers, not in fragments, but in a way no one could deny. This wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about ending their illusion once and for all. The final gathering came in early spring, one of Lorraine's beloved dinner parties, where she paraded our family like trophies before a captive audience. The Kensington house sparkled, crystal glasses, polished silver, and a chandelier that dripped with light. It was her stage, her kingdom, but what she didn't realize was that tonight, it would also be her undoing. I walked in wearing a calm smile, my notebook tucked neatly in my bag, my phone fully charged. Not because I wanted to humiliate them, but because I was done carrying their lies on my shoulders. Tonight, the truth belonged to me. The evening began as it always did. Lorraine fawned over Jared, praising his entrepreneurial brilliance. Tessa chimed in with polished laughter, the perfect supporting act. I sat quietly, letting the performance play out, letting the audience grow restless under the weight of familiarity. Then, as dessert was cleared, Lorraine struck. "You know," she said, her tone heavy with mock concern, "I only wish Aria could find the same success as Jared and Tessa. But she insists on fighting us. It breaks a mother's heart to see a child so jealous." Her words hung in the air, rehearsed and polished, meant to brand me once and for all. But this time, I was ready. I leaned forward, my voice calm, even gentle. "That's an interesting story, Mom. But I think the family deserves the full version." The room quieted instantly, eyes turned to me, curiosity sparking. Lorraine froze, her smile faltering. Jared shifted uncomfortably. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. My thumb moved swiftly, bringing up the screenshots, the receipts, the bank transfers, line after line of proof. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is the money I lent Jared when he couldn't pay his rent. And this," I swiped to another screen, "is when I covered his car payment. This is when I paid Tessa's loan. And these," I opened another file, "are messages from Mom herself, asking me to fix their mistakes so the family wouldn't know." Gasps echoed around the table. Forks clattered against plates. My father leaned forward, his face ashen but firm, his eyes locked on Lorraine. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard. Lorraine stammered, her hands fluttering. It's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," I cut in, my tone calm but unyielding. "For years you've called me useless, jealous, bitter. But I was the one carrying this family while you protected Jared's lies. And I'm done." The silence that followed was deafening. Jared's face flushed red, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Tessa stared at her plate, unable to meet anyone's eyes. And Lorraine, the matriarch, the queen of the Kensington image, sat pale and trembling, her power slipping like water through her fingers. My father's voice broke the silence. "Enough, Lorraine. Enough lies. Aria has been stronger than all of us, and I let you convince me otherwise. No more." And just like that, the illusion shattered. Relatives who had once whispered behind my back now looked at me with new eyes, not as the jealous, bitter child Lorraine had painted, but as the quiet backbone of a family that had never thanked her. I gathered my bag and rose from the table, my voice steady as I looked at them all. "I'm not asking for your approval anymore. I don't need it. But I won't let anyone rewrite who I am again. If you want to believe in lies, that's your choice. But the truth is here, and it won't go away." With that, I turned and walked out of the Kensington house. The night air was cool, crisp, freeing. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not because the scars of my family's words had vanished, but because they no longer defined me. My revenge had not been fire or fury. It had been patience, proof, truth. And in the end, that was what destroyed them more than anything else. As I walked down the quiet street, stars glittering above, I thought of the girl I had once been. Silent, small, convinced she was worthless. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced down her family's cruelty and walked away stronger. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the scapegoat, the jealous one, the useless child. I was Aria Kensington, and I had won.